Welcome, everyone. We at HR.com are very excited to bring you this webcast today, Inside Out and Outside In Product Marketing to Your Target Audience, sponsored by Maya Systems and HRMI. Unlike the hundreds of HR-focused webcasts that we conduct every year for our audience of over 1 million HR professionals, this webcast is part of a series of webcasts that are for CEOs and sales and marketing professionals who are responsible for marketing products and building a business in the human capital space. HRMI is committed to inspiring and educating HR marketers so they can be their best, drive results, and achieve business success. We'll send you more information about this community after the webcast. So during the webcast, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A tab in your webinar controls and you can type them there. If you have any questions, Vanita Venkatesh will be sure to get to those. And then as well, I'm going to put a link to the exit survey and it will open up in a new browser. So please be sure at the end of the webcast to fill that out. Also, I will put a link to the slides and you can download those as well. So without further ado, it is now my pleasure to turn it over to Vanita Venkatesh.
Thanks, Rhonda. This is Vanita, as Rhonda mentioned, and I'm really excited to kick off the HRMI webinar here, focused around product marketing. So not what we usually do in our day-to-day jobs, talking to HR professionals all day long, but a little bit more about our jobs themselves and how we approach them. And so that's pretty exciting. And I'd love to hear, I hope this can be a more interactive session, and I'd love to hear some questions from all of you. And have a discussion going towards the end, so that would be great. So just before we get going, let me see how I can do this. A little bit about my background and about me. So I actually started my career in financial services. I was creating, marketing, selling, trading, structured credit derivatives. Yes, the stuff that brought the market down back at Lehman Brothers. So you can imagine what that was like. But it was a very interesting experience because it was, I guess, product marketing for the financial services industry within structured credit derivatives. We had to create financial products and then figure out how we were going to position them and sell them and target them to our different investor types. So it was I would say my first job in product marketing back when. I actually switched careers into tech after grad school, following the financial debacle, and then ever since then I've been doing product marketing, product management, product strategy, kind of very much on that side of things. I started off at Workday and was there for several years, and then went on to 2 additional startups to do product marketing, kick off their product marketing team, and then eventually run marketing at another startup. And here at Maya, I'm doing everything marketing and product marketing as well. That's just a little bit about me. And I wanted to set the context. So based on my background, kind of how I look at product marketing, as you can see here, I have three circles in a Venn diagram: product, marketing, and strategy. And I really see product marketing as the intersection of all 3 of them, not just product and not just marketing, or not sitting inside of marketing or product, but really bringing all 3 of those together. It's driven by a few tenets, this philosophy of mine for product marketing. And that kind of ties back to my experience, which is why I talked about the financial markets a little bit. But it's driven by a few tenets. Number 1 is what we're saying, truthful. So is product marketing actually driven by product, and is it truthful? Is it representative of the company and the reality of where we are in the market? And so that's kind of where the strategy piece comes in. And finally, is it solving and talking to our target customer's needs? And so that's kind of where the marketing piece comes in. And then finally, does all of that come together to drive demand? So I'm a firm believer that marketing is in place for a couple of reasons. Number one, thought leadership. Number two, brand awareness. And number three, demand generation. And if you talk to any marketer, they will say, yes, demand is a very big, initiative of ours. And product marketing plays a very big role in that, because it's what we say to drive demand. We can't just, get people in the door and have them, expect one thing and provide them another. So when I think about marketing and the role that product marketing plays into there, I think product marketing really helps create and deliver the value drivers that are coming from the product, as well as the go-to-market approach from the company strategy, and bringing that into marketing as well, into the messaging out there. So really, I see product marketing as a gel pulling all of these pieces together. So when I think about how companies approach their marketing, and this is from, again, the product marketing lens, I see companies really approaching it in two different ways. One is what I call marketing first. And so this is, I'll explain what it is in just a second. And the other is product first. So the marketing first approach, and there are several companies that do this. Neither one of these is good or bad. I would say, I think it's just two different approaches. So the marketing first approach is representing what you need your customers to hear, and putting messages out there that are really honing in on what customers need to hear, understanding what they care about, and telling them the messages that need to drive demand, ultimately, first and foremost. I think in that world, probably demand is pretty top of that priority list. So it's very dependent on content. It's very dependent on the different marketing programs that you take part in, but it's a very marketing forward approach. The other one is product first, and I see a lot of companies that do this as well, and I've worked at companies that kind of follow both approaches. The product first approach is more like, let's build it and they will come to a degree. And I think that's, you see that in a lot of companies that are very, if you look at the investment that they're putting a lot more investment into the product, and then you end up having a couple of product marketing people that are there to just transcribe and translate a very complicated product at times into a little bit more simpler messaging for the market. Now, as I mentioned, I don't think either of these is better than the other. I think it just depends on the company and the market that you're operating in. And also it depends on if you're operating in a new category, or disrupting a category, or if you're playing in a very noisy or busy category as well. So in that latter one, in a noisy or busy category with lots of players, marketing first really matters. And then you think about your differentiators and build in the product messaging there. I think for kind of new frontier categories, or categories where people haven't really created a product before, you end up with product first approaches. So take the iPod, for example. It was disrupting and creating a new category at the time, and even smartphones back when. That's more of a product first approach. Here's our product. Here's what it does for you, versus let me think of an example for marketing first. Is kind of like the Pepsi versus Coke, I would say, battle there with soda is a very different approach. It's more of a marketing first approach. And so with that, I wanted to jump right into our first poll. So based on this explanation, I'm wondering if you think that your company follows this marketing first go-to-market strategy, or a product first go-to-market strategy, or a mix of the two. But really think about if it fits into one or two. I think a lot of companies will fall under one or the other. what I do find, again, just as we're, as we're hosting the poll, think about the investment that you have in your company. So do you have more marketers or do you have more engineers? I mean, that's kind of a hard one to distinguish, but what is your company's investment largely in, and priority wise as well. So, all right, we'll give that a couple minutes. Oh, interesting. Okay, so so I'll read out the poll results here. 75% of you say it's a mix of the two, which is great. That's surprising to me because I would have expected more of one or two, and only one each for 13% each for either marketing first or product first go-to-market strategy. So that's pretty interesting. So let's call it a split half and half. And let me talk a little bit more about the target here. So when I think about product market fit and what goes into assessing it, I think it varies very greatly between a marketing first go-to-market strategy and a product first go-to-market strategy. So maybe I should have run the poll a little bit later in this recording, or we can run it again later. So when I think about product market fit, it's really balancing between product demand as well as competition. And again, depending on where you are in the industry, in the market, this can vary. So do you have a very new product that people don't really see competitors to? Do you have a very niche product, or do you have something that folks really need? So from a demand perspective, and what is driving this product market fit? So if I think about the three legs of this stool, it's really around product, demand, and competition. And what you see is at these joins are between product and demand. It's really figuring out market relevance. So is there demand for this product that I'm going to build? I would say that the product first go-to-market type of company will really just think about that. So what is the market relevance? Or do we have a product market fit here? Are we solving our customers' needs? Where's the demand? And are we building the product for it? I think once you start seeing competition come in and more players, it's almost saying that, hey, demand has been established. And so between demand and now knowing that there is competition, there is a big market opportunity. And sometimes, especially in the HR space, you see lots of different vendors coming in with different approaches to solving a very similar problem. So for example, I currently play in the recruiting space, and there's plenty of inefficiencies within the recruiting lifecycle that need to be solved. And we see amongst all of our competitors, or even pseudo competitors, whatever they might be, there's plenty of different approaches to addressing that inefficiency, which to me shows great market opportunity. Now the next question is, okay, how does the product that we build address that demand? Is there market relevance? And then finally, combining product and competition, you see that there is a market fit. So once you have kind of all three of these coming together in your environment, you can definitely say, okay, yes, we have achieved product market fit. Not only do we have a product that works, we have the competition to validate the fact that there is an industry, there is an opportunity here, and there's the demand. So things will start to pick up and continue from there. Of course, when we're trying to assess the demand that's out there and take our message out to the world, out to our buyers, the next step of this process here is defining the target audience. So I think, again, I've seen this happen a lot in the HR space. a lot of times we, target our audience as the end users or the end buyers, or candidates for, like, for example, in recruiting. And we have to remember that our target audience for our messaging is one of many things. You can't just say I have, a target audience and they're the HR managers, mainly because we have decision makers, we have our influencers, and we have our champions. So when I'm talking about the decision makers, it's the people who hold the purse strings. So they have the budget. Oftentimes for HR, that can be, in the executive office, the CEO, sometimes the CHRO actually has a budget that they can work against, oftentimes not. Sometimes it falls under the CFO, so any budget decisions go all the way up to the CFO level, depending on the size of the company. Or oftentimes for technology especially, that budget sits within the IT department, so the CIO controls that budget, or somebody in the IT department controls that budget. Because of that, the tricky thing for marketers marketing HR products especially, we end up having several audiences. And we end up having several people that we need to talk to and educate about our products and the relevancy of our products to their company. So I think first and foremost, one of the first things to do is defining that target audience. Who are those decision makers? Who really cares? Does that vary by size of company? Does that vary by the vertical that prospect base sits in? Does that vary by their regulatory requirements as well? That's for decision makers. When it comes to the champions, it's oftentimes, for us anyway, oftentimes in the HR departments themselves, right? So it's the folks who are, taking your product and taking it internally and selling it internally to their stakeholders within their organization. And then the influencers. The influencers can be both positive and negative. So these are folks that will, say, oh, I've heard about XYZ product. We should think about them. Not necessarily a champion, but just, adding their opinion, and their opinion matters. Or they could be, oftentimes we have found in the, especially in the IT side of things, they can be negative influencers. So, hey, you shouldn't buy that product because XYZ, or, we used to face this at previous companies. We have vendor A in all of our systems. And so we're going to buy this product from vendor A, even though their product might not be superior, or may not even actually address the issue at hand. So oftentimes they have those, and they're influencers. I wouldn't necessarily say they're decision makers, and they're definitely not our champions. So it's very important to define that, and also very important to recognize who are the negative influencers, because we will end up needing to address them as well with our content. So one of the first worksheets that I like to put together is kind of, let's talk about our target audience. Let's define them. So who is the primary audience? And that goes back to what I was just talking about. There can be many of them. And so let's list out all the different options that we can possibly think of the decision makers. What are the 15 different possibilities? What are their titles, and what are their roles? What are their roles within the company? And also the org structure, by the way, too. And then narrowing that down. So when we think about everybody we want to address, everybody that needs to know about our product, and then narrowing that down to our top 3. And once we pick those top 3, I would make sure you have one decision maker, at least one influencer, and one champion audience point. And for those 3, make sure that they also go together, so that you can target a single type of organization. So, in one organization, you might have a CHRO as your decision maker. In that same organization, you might have HRIT as your champion, and you might have HR manager as your influencer. But you probably won't have, if you have CHRO as your decision maker, CFO as your champion, and I don't know, CIO as your influencer. So make sure that they are coherent and work together. Once you've narrowed down your list to that focused few, making sure to understand the pain points that they're feeling. Oftentimes at the decision maker level, they're thinking about how does a purchase tie back to our strategic initiatives or my strategic goals that my CEO has given me, or our company's strategic goals for the year. And being able to map back our product to a strategic goal is extremely important to finding that urgency. And I would say, especially in the HR space, I feel like we face the biggest competition that we face most often is the do nothing competitor. And so when we're facing do nothing, the hardest thing to do is say, okay, well, that competitor is worse because, or we're better than that competitor because it's a do nothing. It's why should I act? And the most important thing to do there is create urgency. And that's driven specifically by the pain points. Here are the pain points. Here's why the pain points matter, or costing you money, or creating turnover, or whatever it might be. And those pain points can be solved directly with this product. And this is why you have to put this in place yesterday. So driving that urgency is driven directly from those pain points. And that also drives the values. So what do they care about? And so what is the value driver for them? Is it cost savings? Is it revenue generation? Where does that value come from? And tying those again back to the company's strategic goals is super important. And so then you go through and do this for your, all three of those categories of audience members. And then I would say the next stage of it is thinking about it from an inside-out positioning standpoint. So when I describe inside out, I think of it as I'm wearing my vendor hat on, and I'm looking out into the world and asking these questions. What does the world need to know? What does my audience need to know about us? And what's the story we want to tell? And what's the story we want them to tell? And so that second one is pretty important. It's when you tell a story to somebody else, you want them to walk over to their neighbor and tell them the story, and you want them to say it your way. And so if they can do that, what's the story that we want them to tell? What do people end up, why do people end up buying our product? And so this is kind of the looking at us, ourselves, and doing a reflection back on what are the drivers that people are actually buying our product for? Are we saying the same thing? Are they buying us for one thing and using us for another? So it's not just buying, but it's also using. So what are they doing with it? And then is it creating value from there? Is it creating value for us? Is it opening up a market opportunity? Is there potential as well? So you might have a product that's bought for a feature, and that's all it is. So I remember about 5-6 years ago when I think it was Yammer was bought by Salesforce, if I'm getting the acquisition correct. But it was a feature that ended up getting bought by a larger company because the feature was bought by customers, but then it never really developed beyond a feature, even though the vision was pretty large, and a feature ended up getting bought and incorporated into a larger vision product, which is very interesting. And then finally, inside out, again, us talking out to the audience, what differentiates us in the market. So this is kind of how we see ourselves differentiated in the market. And of course, I wouldn't say you can have a story with only inside out, and I wouldn't say you could have a story with only outside in. And we'll talk about outside in just a second. But I think it's really important to recognize all of these questions and answer all of these questions as well. So then thinking about the outside in, this is the feedback loop coming back in from our customer base and from each of those 3 target audience groups in their categories. So why do they care? I think I love this phrase, and I used to have a Post-it on my desk, and everything I ever wrote, I would always write, think about, why do they care? We want to say one story, but why does somebody else care? What do they want to know? So oftentimes, it's very interesting in new categories and while we're creating new categories, what do people even want to know? What do they don't even know what to ask. So what do they really care about, and what do they really want to know about, AI for recruiting, for example? What do they need to know also before they can make a decision? They need to know, we'll talk about that during the example section. What are their objectives? So this goes back to that previous slide when we were talking about pain points and, strategic objectives, department objectives, etc. So what are their objectives? How does that drive what people care about or what they're passionate about? And therefore what they need to know about in order to make a decision. And then finally, what do they need to see to make a decision? And so that, that drives, whether it's an ROI analysis or it's customer references and customer case studies, or depending on how they make their decisions internally, what is it that you need to, check off before you can put together everything that's needed to make a decision. So when I say inside out and outside in, I think it has to be a mix of both. Now, I've worked at companies that are driven very much by outside in. And so they end up catering entirely, all of their marketing, all of their materials are catered entirely by outside in. And what you end up seeing is companies that are very driven by this outside in mentality end up building pointed solutions for their flagship customers. And oftentimes can't even get out of the cycle of taking a product to the general market. And sometimes, especially in the startup side, they end up creating very customized solutions for specific clients, and it ends up failing because you can't scale it past a single or a small set of customers, or you end up having to rebuild at that point. You see that on the product side. You also see that on the marketing side, where you end up catering entirely to, say, the media or the press in order to get as much noise as possible. But oftentimes that doesn't feed back into product and into the rest of the company. And then, where does that go? You end up having a lot of customers come on board, or having a lot of prospects come on board. But then it makes the actual, again, retention of customers really difficult, and you end up seeing a lot of customer churn oftentimes. When you think about companies that focus a lot on inside out positioning, and again, I've worked at companies that do this as well, you end up seeing companies that struggle with market relevancy because they are talking about their product and they're trying to launch everything around the inside out perspective, without necessarily, taking the pulse constantly of the market and of their audiences. So I think there's pitfalls to having just one or the other, which is why I think product marketing really is the linchpin to hold this together and make sure that we're bringing together both inside out and outside in perspectives when thinking about our messaging. So product marketing really sits at the center of both product and marketing. Marketing should be very, the inside out, we're promoting our message. Product should be very outside in. Let's make sure we're taking in the feedback. And product marketing makes sure that, both of them are happening at the same time and together and in both places, both on the product side and the marketing side. So when we talked about the target audience worksheet, another one I really like to think about with this inside out and outside in philosophy paired together is really the empathy map. And so I feel like this is a very good way to approach marketing from a product standpoint, because it creates empathy within the product, it creates empathy within the messaging. And it really answers that question, what do they care about? And also why should they care? And so I'll just go through these pretty quickly here, but who are we empathizing with? And so, again, back to that target audience, who are they? What's their situation? What's their role? What do they play in? And then what do they need to do? So that goes back to their objectives, their decision tree, their decision timeline, and their success criteria. How do we know that they have succeeded? Succeeded once they've done that. So what do they see? What are our target customers seeing? What are our different influencers seeing? What do they care about? What are they seeing within their environment? Is there, when you're especially going into an enterprise, is there a political environment there that you can oftentimes get champions to give you the insight into? Do they see what other people are doing within the organization? How can you bring that back into your your selling cycle too? Also, what are they influenced by? So what are they reading? What are they watching? How are they learning? How are they picking up information? Okay, what do they say? So what are they passionate about as well? So what are they talking about out there in the marketplace? What are we, what can we imagine them saying based on what, this kind of, you can play this in a couple of different ways, but if you think about your different audiences, whether it's by enterprise or by small and mid-market or other types of companies, what are they saying out in the market? And so therefore, what are their triggers? And so you see a lot of companies, for example, Pepsi, will care a lot about their brand and how they promote themselves out in the world. So is there something there that we can empathize with? Finally, what do they do? What's their behaviors? And what are we observing from these customers and companies? What do they hear? This comes back to kind of references and who are they hearing things from? Who do they talk to? And what are they hearing from friends, colleagues, or secondhand, or influencers, or analysts, or wherever it might be? And then finally, what do they think and feel? So what are the pain points, going back to that initial thing that we talked about, and what do they want to achieve? And so I would love to get some questions around this, or even comments around this during the Q&A section. And I would love to hear what you guys are seeing in the market, and what you guys are finding as well. So this very last bit, and I'll try to keep it short because I want to I want to open this up to discussion. But I wanted to go through a quick example of crafting a story. And so thinking about a target audience, thinking about the outside in perspective, and then the inside out perspective as well. And I thought I would just do this with our current company. So I currently work at Maya Systems. We're in the AI for recruiting space, specifically conversational AI, and building a platform around conversational experiences that recruiters and enterprises, as well as staffing agencies, can put in place to address inefficiencies within their recruiting pipeline. So, as you're getting high volumes of applicants, how do you respond to all of them in a natural and interactive way? When you're getting folks coming to your career site, how do you respond to them or interact with them and help the candidate feel the love? When somebody applies to a job, whether it's via a text message on a billboard or a job board or a career site, how do you ensure that they feel like they've not been lost? They've thrown their resume in and now it's in the black hole. How do you create that experience of responsiveness from a company standpoint? And also, how do companies think about their own branding and their own image when it comes to recruiting and capturing talent? We all know the war for talent and how hard it is. I'm sure all of you at your own companies are also in the spot of we're always looking for good talent for us to hire as well. And so that war for talent makes the brand piece of it, the company brand piece of it, pretty important as well, and not just in our industry. So when I think about this example, I think about the target audience. So who cares about AI, and who in HR cares about AI, or what do they care about? When you think about companies and putting AI in place, oftentimes you will see that the people who care are IT folks or people in the technology side. Sometimes that falls under HRIT if it's specific to HR, but oftentimes it's like a chief innovation officer that has a command to think about AI across their entire business, or a chief digital officer at times, and also end users. So I think end users is an interesting one here, because it comes to the me and you of every organization. We're used to having Siri or Alexa or whatever else on our smartphone. And if we can make reservations at restaurants without actually doing any input, then why can't we put those sort of tools into our enterprise environments to make it much easier? So I think end users end up becoming a big influencer, especially more so now that consumer technology has really picked up and taken off. And then on the HR side, and so this is specifically for AI for HR, who cares in HR? Oftentimes it's HRIT, because they're going to be the ones that are managing the systems, and they also oftentimes see a lot of the inefficiencies and the pain points, and are managing all the different integrations, because there are so many different systems that need to be put in place in order to keep the ship running. The CHRO, or the head of HR, HRVP, whatever that might be, would care, because ultimately they have objectives within their HR departments. Whether it's figure out a way to reduce turnover, or we really need to make sure that we focus on talent development this year. Whatever those objectives might be, if there is a way to make it more efficient and more cost effective, that's a big deal. And I think for all of us, we probably oftentimes have to deal with, oh my God, the HR budget, where does it sit and where does it lie? And tying back to those objectives and making sure we know that, keep in mind that the HR expense is oftentimes an expense, not a revenue generator, depending on the industry that you're working in. But you need to make sure that you address kind of the relevant objectives in order to get people to listen. And again, here it could be like a chief digital officer or innovation officer that sits within HR or is focused on HR initiatives. So that's the target audience bit. Then if I think about inside out, so how do we craft this story? Let's talk about our product. So we're talking about AI for HR. Here's the product that you walk away with. Here are the features that you need to have in order to check the box. But that's actually not enough, because you also need to have the market validation. Here are other customers and what they're doing. This is the cool thing, because especially in new categories, I think oftentimes people think about the bells and the whistles, and that's the cool thing. Everybody wants to have ML or AI in their solutions, but really, is that real? Again, going back to my very first point, make sure that it's truthful and representative of the company and product reality. And crafting our story, so our differentiators, which comes through not just the product, also when you're creating a new category. Why is AI important within HR? Especially when you think of AI, you think of ML. It's extremely data driven and machine, like structured data driven, and at the same time, HR is very much soft skills and qualities and sentiment and intent, and all of these soft skills. So how does AI even fit into the HR world? Can those even overlap? So I think when we were thinking about it, our product inside out, we oftentimes get sucked into the fact like, oh, everybody knows what AI is. Everybody knows why it's relevant. So let's just tell everybody what we do and why it's the best, without necessarily considering market education. So that's something to keep in mind for this specific example. And then last slide here is looking at the outside in. So when I think about this specific example, AI for HR, what are the current challenges that HR folks are facing? So if I think about recruiting specifically, we mentioned the black hole. That could be the current challenge. The inundation of applications for high volume roles, that could be the challenge. Or the fact that they're sitting on very large databases of applicants that had once applied and once expressed interest, but all of that data is out of date. That could be the current challenge. And how do you reactivate that? Or with GDPR, how do you make sure that you get rid of the ones that are not interested and figure out your opt-in, opt-out, for example? So then from there, how do those tie back into strategic objectives? So when we're thinking about recruiting specifically, what are the strategic objectives of a company? Is it to hire as many people as needed within the time frame? Is it hiring the right people, or helping reduce turnover? So continue to hire, but make sure those people are going to be retained. Is it hiring people that are already fully experienced and fit qualifications, or hiring for potential? There's two very different philosophies there. And so how do you help either one? Outside in, so again, thinking about that org structure, where does your influencer sit in the organization? Where does your champion sit within the organization? And ultimately, where is the decision maker sitting? And this one I see vary a ton, as I mentioned. Even with our customers, we see them. The org structures vary quite a bit. And in past companies, when I've dealt with payroll, for example, payroll half the time sat under finance and half the time sat under HR, and it just varied greatly. And thinking about that and how you message and how you market, either you have to pick one and go with it, or cover both bases all at once. So that's very important. So what's the org structure of the people that you're talking to? And then finally, what is it to them? So why should anybody care about AI for HR? Do they even care? Like, do they feel like, what are their fears? So oftentimes, especially in the recruiting space, over this past year, some of the fears have been around, do recruiters believe that they're going to be replaced by AI? What's going to happen to all my coordinators? What's going to happen to all these people that I've employed? Are they going to get replaced by AI? And there's definitely companies that are trying to do that, are trying to replace headcount with automation. But I would say there's also companies that are trying to augment humans with ease of efficiency and ease of task doing. And so I think that's important to understand the dynamic within the customer that or prospect that you're addressing. What is it to them? Is it somebody that's coming in to replace them? Is it somebody that's coming in to help them? How does that affect the dynamic? So that's really the story that I had, and I think we have just about 15 minutes left here. So I wanted to open this up to questions and any discussions. So let me see, I think there's a couple chats in here. Where's the Q&A panel? So yeah, please use the Q&A panel to insert your questions, and I will get to them, or we can talk about them. One of the questions that I had here, are there really easy ways to understand what they care about, what our audience cares about? I think a big part of this is going to be knowing where they are. So going back to that empathy map, where are they? What are they seeing? What are they hearing? And what are they reading? And so understanding what our audience reads and cares about. And HR.com is a great place, actually a great resource around this. And so for all of us, I think that becomes a very big resource to understand what people care about, what are they discussing, what are, as I mentioned, the fears in the recruiting side. I end up seeing that a lot because of articles that I'm, of the people that I follow, what are they talking about? And so I would say it's not always the easiest, and we always go back to, you know, our analysts and our influencers to understand, but sometimes it's also important to go back to our actual end users and even ask them, hey, what are the publications that you read? Or where do you go for your certifications even? So next question here, how much data goes into assessing the target audience? So data is a very important factor into feedback and, you know, capturing your target audience and understanding if you've got it right, and looking back at those folks coming in, coming out, and it's extremely important for the iteration of the target audience itself, as well as how you I guess bring that information back to your product teams, how you bring that information back to your marketing teams. I find on the marketing operations side especially, they'll think a lot about, you know, engagement and click-throughs and the engagement rate, but making sure that you're also adding in the click-through by, you know, X title, click-through by X type of company, and bringing that back to assessing the target audience continuously and making sure that we have the right target audience even. And tying that back to the sales cycle and the entire buyer's journey. So making sure that we have that right, and also finding out where there's the most drop off, where there's the most you know, objection, or where, you know, we might be spending a lot of effort but we don't need to because it's the quickest conversion and pass through point. I think that's all data based and it's super important. And then let's see, one more question coming in here. What if you're a service firm offering multiple products, such as recruiting, consulting, PEO services, payroll, etc.? Is that too confusing to the audience? I think when you have multiple products, you have to think about the messaging in the following way. What's your company messaging? So we are providing, in this case, for example, we're providing services to our, you know, many audiences. These are the services that we provide. That's kind of the inside out perspective. But within each of those service areas, you'll probably have a different set of audiences. So on the recruiting side, who cares about your recruiting services versus your consulting services versus your payroll services? Oftentimes at the companies that you're addressing, you know, you don't want to you want to make sure you don't send a payroll message, for example, to a recruiting person, and vice versa. Except for the fact that at a higher level, you have to make sure that your overall company messaging and your company positioning ties it all together. And I would imagine that you're not selling recruiting services and then have a hot dog stand on the other side, and they're not entirely different. So what's the value that you're bringing to a company at a higher level? So put yourself in the, you know, the CFO's shoes, for example, for this sort of a service firm. Hey, you don't have the staff for recruiting and payroll and, you know, your HR department. Let us take that on for you, and here's the value that we're going to provide. We'll take that off your hands. We'll take care of everything. Here's the white glove service. And oftentimes that's what in a very, you know, cost prudent way. And that's oftentimes, like, for example, what a CFO might care about with this sort of an offering. Okay, and then let's see, one more thing here. What are some of the frameworks you follow or can put in place for product marketing? Some of my favorite frameworks are the ones that are put out by SiriusDecisions. Their product marketing framework is actually fantastic. If you haven't taken a look at it, please do. I really love how they segregate all the different tasks and things that product marketing, and product all have to do, and kind of depending on your type of organization, they can fall into different categories. And also the pragmatic marketing frameworks, I really like those as well. Some very good learnings for us. So any other questions that are coming through here? Okay, if not, I'll hand it back to Rhonda, and we can probably get a little bit of time back in our Fridays.
Yeah, that's perfect, Vanita. Thank you so much, so much. I know I got a lot of great takeaways. Just sitting here, my neck's almost sore from nodding. Thank you so much. This concludes the HR Marketing webcast today. I'd like to thank our presenter again, Vanita Venkatesh, for such an excellent webcast. Thank you to Maya for sponsoring and to HRMI, and thank you so much to everyone for joining us here today. If you'd like to view the webcast again, the archive recording and the slides will be available for up to 7 days for our free members and without restrictions for those with an HRMI membership. So you can check that out as well. Your feedback is important to us, so please take a moment to fill out the exit survey, and it opened up in another browser, and you can answer that as soon as the webcast has ended. So yeah, we will give you back the gift of a little bit of time here on your Friday. So thanks so much again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.